Okay, welcome everybody to Beyond the Crisis, where through a series of conversations, we aim to explore what the future holds when we get back to quote unquote normal, whatever that ends up looking like. And kind of more importantly, how we can use this crisis to actually accelerate the progress we're trying to make in life, with our work and with our money as well. So I'm happy to have Josh Lehner with us today. Josh is an economist with the state of Oregon, where he and the team at the Office of Economic Analysis provide forecasts on the economy, revenue for the state, and population. And he provides those to the governor, legislature, and others that are trying to make long-term plans for the state. So I'm interested to talk with Josh today to explore what this current crisis might mean for employment, for housing, for impacts on different areas around the state, and kind of the outlook for Oregon overall in the crisis. So Josh, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe an interesting place to start before we get into all of this is just give us a little bit about your background. What led you to become an economist?
It's not a path a lot of us choose. It really comes from the numbers, right? Always found numbers and math and statistics to be interesting and enjoyable. I started out in engineering, but I soon discovered that wasn't for me. Thermodynamics is not very exciting, truth be told. And so made my way over to economics because it's kind of the combination of learning about people, societies, human nature, and applying that kind of with the math rigor and trying to model things and understand them. And it just happened to be a kind of a perfect fit for what I found very enjoyable. And I'm lucky enough to be in the job I am now where most of the time it really is an enjoyable job, and I like going into the office or working from home and crunching numbers on things I find interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you say most of the time it's an enjoyable job. How have you found 2020 to be? I imagine it's stressful. There's a lot going on. Would you say 2020 has been enjoyable or not so much?
No, maybe the first month and a half was enjoyable, and since then it's not. We have the perverse effect that people want to talk to us more in bad times than in good times. People don't want to hear from us in good times other than to say, oh yeah, things are good. We think things will continue to be good. But they want to talk a whole lot more when we're in a bad situation, which we find ourselves in now. And so, really ever since the crisis started and the shutdown with the social distancing a couple months ago, we've been talking with policymakers and the public quite a bit about our thoughts on the outlook.
Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit, if you don't mind. I know you recently put out the June 2020 economic and revenue forecast for the state, and kind of had the unenviable job of relaying that to the governor and taking a look at what revenue looks like going forward. So I guess first question is just what kind of shape are we in as a state right now?
Well, we're in the deepest recession on record. We have data back to 1939 on the employment side in Oregon. So we don't have the Great Depression, but anything outside since then, it's the most severe recession we've seen. And so that's less business sales, fewer transactions, fewer workers employed and the like. And that translates into less revenue for public entities, whether you're local or state or federal for that matter. And so a lot less. We reduced the general fund outlook 10 to 15%, so billions of dollars and fewer resources. We reduced some of the other revenues by more than that. Some of the lottery sales and the corporate activity tax, the new one, that are more based on sales. They're down 20% or so relative to previous forecasts.
Right.
And so it's been a big shift in the outlook.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the silver linings to all this is I know some of the reserve funds for the state are higher than they had been historically. Now, how much does that help? How much does that offset these declines in revenue?
It's a tremendous help on the budget side. For the first time in Oregon's history, we have $1.7 billion in reserves in the two main reserve funds, the Rainy Day Fund and the Education Stability Fund. And those have really added up in the last decade, over the decade-long economic expansion, these automatic deposits. And so what policymakers have done in the last 10, 15 years is they set it up so that they don't have to divert extra funds. They get automatic deposits that happen. And so over 10 years, they've really added up. And so the, $1.5 to $2 billion in reserves is tremendously beneficial on the budgetary side of things. But it's not enough to make up for the shortfall in revenues, nor the increase in spending that comes with higher caseloads for people that need, food stamps or Medicaid or some of these other assistance programs in tough times. So the budget's not held harmless, but it's certainly from a policy perspective, this is the best Oregon has been probably ever.
Yeah, no, it's great. So I know another part of the revenue is historically we've been more volatile, just the dependence on personal and business income tax. And it seems like recently some of these programs that you've mentioned, right, the lottery, corporate activity tax, some of these other things have helped in terms of diversifying the revenue streams. I guess how is the state positioned just from a source of revenue? So revenue's down, but how is it positioned from a source? And have some of these more recent taxes helped, or is this actually an environment where actually some of those things, they might diversify, but they're not really helpful in this environment?
Yeah, so we diversified our revenue streams just in time for the first business cycle where sales taxes are getting hit as bad as income taxes, right? Because we suppressed consumer spending, right? The whole point of the shutdowns and the shelter-in-place style policies was to stop the spread of a deadly contagious disease. So that means we stayed home and we didn't spend as much money. And by not spending as much money, that's less sales-based tax revenue. And so I think sales taxes versus income taxes are going to get hit about the same this cycle, roughly speaking, whereas more normally, income taxes are much more volatile. There's a risk versus return associated with the income tax versus the sales tax discussion, where sales taxes are more stable, but they grow slower year to year. Income taxes are much more volatile, but they grow faster in the good times because the economy is growing faster. And so, I think we've made some big structural changes that policymakers and the voters think are the right policies for Oregon. This cycle is probably different than a normal. It is different than a normal recession. Right. So how it'll play out over the long run, is different than what we're going to see today.
Got it. Okay. Now, I know historically Oregon's economy, maybe versus the average state, has been more prone to kind of boom bust cycles. Again, the economy itself has been more volatile just because of maybe the nature of the industries that are here. Is that still the case? And if so, are we worse off from that perspective going into this and coming through this crisis?
Yeah, so Oregon historically has always been more volatile than the U.S. Though the one misconception about that is that you hear all sorts of things, whether we're first into the recession, last out of the recession, or maybe last in and last out, or whatever the case may be. The timing of our cycle actually coincides perfectly with the U.S. So when the U.S. goes down, we go down. When the U.S. comes out, we come out, but we are more volatile. We grow faster in expansion, fall further in recession. And so over the long run, we come out ahead because we spend so many more years in good times than we do, or at least growing times, than we do in recession. But this time, at least initially, these first few months of data that we have on the downturn, Oregon seems to be hit about average, not, maybe a little worse than the average, depending upon the metric we're looking at, but not like we normally are. And so I think a lot of that has to do with the industries that were kind of the tip of the spear of this recession, of leisure and hospitality, travel, tourism, all those sort of things that we shut down immediately. We're kind of average on that front. We're not overweight in leisure and hospitality or travel or those things. They're important, but they're about average in Oregon compared to the rest of the country.
Got it. Okay. And when we get into more different regions around the state, I would imagine some of them, Coast, for example, probably Bend has been more impacted by some of this. So get into that more later, but that's helpful from an overall state perspective. One of the other things I'm wondering about, and I don't know if you have thoughts on this or if it's fair ground to cover, you guys focus mostly on the revenue side, but what about the spending side? If revenue's down, if this is going to be a protracted recession, what are some of the impacts that are going to be necessary coming down the line in terms of offsetting potentially or supplementing some of the spending that's in the budget? Do you have any thoughts on that, or maybe just thoughts on where we go from here and how we deal with this issue?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a protracted. Our office's forecast is a protracted recovery. We think it's going to take 4.5 years to get back to a fully healthy economy, right? The kind of, we'll get most of the way back pretty quickly, but it'll take a while to get all the way back. And now what that means for the spending side, that's not something we delve in, right? There's a budget office on the executive branch side, and then there's the budget office on the legislative side, and they really do all the finer work there. But they're working overtime, trying to figure it out. We got a special session coming up to deal with criminal justice and COVID on a health side of things, and then potentially a special session to deal on the revenue and spending side of things. So they're working on it. We feed them our revenue numbers and our thoughts on the outlook, and then they work with the elected officials to put the finishing touches on the spending stuff.
Yeah, got it. Now, you mentioned 4 years to kind of get back to full employment or where we were previously going in. I think that probably compares to the last recession, 07, 08, 09 kind of period. That was a longer recovery, something like 7, 8 years. Is that about right? Okay. And
right.
Then like some other recessions like 90s and things like that, probably on the shorter side of that. So we're kind of in between some of the scenarios we've had in the past. The other thing that I know you've done some work on is, like a good forecaster, you're not just going to provide one number, you're going to provide a range of estimates, kind of an upside and a downside scenario. Can you talk a little bit about what would cause us to get one of those scenarios? What would be the sequence of events that would lead us to an upside scenario? We recover faster, stronger, and then conversely on the other side, what would cause us for this recession to be longer and look maybe like an 08 style recession instead of a quicker recovery?
And so the way our current thinking on it is, and the way we kind of modeled some of these alternative scenarios, is there can be a health trigger or an economic trigger, both to the upside and the downside. And on the upside, on the health side of things, the health situation improves considerably faster than expected. Maybe a vaccine's developed quicker or some sort of treatment, or the virus mutates and kind of goes away. Like it becomes less, a more benign form is possible.
Right.
And so that would mean that the health side of things improves and everything goes back faster than normal. And that we're kind of thinking, maybe takes 2 to 3 years to get back to full employment as opposed to 4 or 5. And so it'd be faster than that. And on the economic side of things, people just being more resilient would be the nice way to call it. They're just being more confident in going about their normal lives and learning to grow around the virus faster than expected. I think some of the numbers we're starting to see when it comes to consumer spending, retail sales, video lottery numbers coming out of our bars and restaurants in Oregon are better than expected. How much of that has to do with all of the federal payments, the one-time recovery rebates or the expanded unemployment insurance and the like? How much of the income and spending numbers are driven by that entirely, versus households and people just being more comfortable, more confident in going out than we maybe assumed in our forecast. So that's kind of the upside. And I think we're seeing some of that better economic data. The concern is how temporary is it, and will it go away if the federal policies go away? Is still unknown. On the downside, again, it can be economic or health driven. On the health side, the resurgence in cases, we're seeing some larger case numbers in Oregon and around the country, whether it's Arizona or Florida or wherever the case may be. That potentially could lead to another round of shelter-in-place style policies and shutdowns, and that would send us right back down to where we were, and all these improvements we see over the summer months would go away. Or it could be the same sort of thing, but the virus is more seasonal. So in the fall, when the flu season comes back, there could be another round of cases and the like. So I think that's the health downside, which is a little bit scary. And the economic side of things would be the reverse of what we just talked about, where people are just scared, right? They're not going out. My family, we're still doing takeout food. We're not sitting down. But every time I go get takeout now to take home or go to a park or whatever, there are people sitting at tables inside. And people are shopping. You drive by some shopping areas, and some of them are quite busy. So it's kind of about that confidence. How comfortable do people feel going out and resuming normal activities?
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. So really, it's the health impacts, keeping an eye on the health numbers. How many cases are we seeing, hospitalization, things like that. And then on the economic side, it's more people's behavior. How are they going out, interacting, getting back to normal or not? It's kind of, and that should show up in the data. Is what you're seeing month over month, you should be able to kind of get a sense of where that's trending.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, some of the economic data is coming in better than expected the last couple weeks and months. Is that permanent? Are we going to see that faster recovery trajectory? I think that's still to be determined, but that's at least an encouraging first step.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So I want to shift gears maybe just a little bit and kind of, we talked big picture of the outlook for Oregon, kind of look at a few different specific things within that outlook. So one of the things look at is, population growth, right? I know that we've, from a state, we were growing population, right? We were seeing net migration into the state. What's the outlook going forward? I mean, imagine in a period like this, you're going to see people aren't moving right now, right? And so you're going to see a decline in terms of population growth. But what's the outlook going forward the next 5-10 years or so?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of helpful to think through the implications on a number of different timelines as you're indicating. But first, Oregon, we benefit tremendously from population growth and net in migration. It's not just about having more people here means we're doing a good job, or it's to grow the population. To grow the population is not a policy goal in and of itself. The real benefit comes from it grows our economy. More people living here, more housing demand, more demand for pizza and beer and all that sort of stuff. But it really provides a supply of predominantly young, skilled labor for local companies to hire and to expand. So our economy benefits because people who move are mostly in their 20s and their 30s, and they disproportionately have higher levels of educational attainment. So it's really about allowing local businesses, people to hire and to expand and to grow the workforce that way. That's really where the economic benefit comes from. Now, what is the outlook? As you said, right, nobody's really moving today, at least certainly in the last couple of months. They're all kind of locked in place and sheltering in place and the like. So that's going to hurt migration this year. We think over the next couple of years, migration will be slower than we previously forecasted due to the recession, right? People don't move as much in a recession. We'll still have more people moving to Oregon than move away. The population will still increase, but it'll increase at a slower rate than we previously assumed. Due to the recessionary effect, where people kind of hunker down, and why would I move across the country to not have a job when I can stay where I am and not have a job? And so people really follow job opportunities. So as the economy recovers and job opportunities return in the years ahead, we think migration flows will pick right back up. And so over the long run, not a lot of permanent damage or permanent reductions. We still think Oregon will be the normal attractive place that it is. But I think, the near term will be slower than we expected just due to the recession itself.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. What about, we're hearing, like, obviously a lot of people are working from home. You're starting to see a lot of tech companies, and we work with a lot of people in the tech industry. You're seeing a lot of these tech companies announcing either long-term work from home policies, permanent work from home policies. What impact, if any, do you think will that have on population growth or potential for population growth in Oregon? If people don't have to stay in the Bay Area to work at one of these tech companies, and they can move up I-5 to Oregon or something like that. Do you think that helps, hurts, or is it kind of just too early to tell? Like, we don't know what the impact will be.
Yeah, it's too early to tell, right? I think it's very too early to tell. People are looking at like Google search trends, or like the realtors are like, oh, I fielded 2 extra calls this month from someone from California, right? So it's anecdotal at best. And so we'll see, but I think they're all up, what we would call upside risk. That would mean that population growth and some of these economic data would turn out better than expected for some of those reasons that you're listing. Now, I think it's kind of a two-edged sword, economically speaking, in the broader sense. On the good side, it means we would have a larger, more skilled workforce than we currently have. Oregon's already the number 2 work from home state in the U.S., right? Behind Colorado, we're number 2. That means the share of our workforce that doesn't commute into the office on a regular basis, it's 6%, maybe 5, 6, not quite 7% overall. And these aren't necessarily remote workers or technology workers. These could be small business owners that work out from home, or independent consultants and the like. So we don't have great data on the remote aspect itself, but we get a broader sense of it from the work from home. And everywhere in Oregon that we have this data on from the census shows we're above average. Bend is a national leader. They're typically first or second in the nation. This year they slipped to 5th. highest work from home share in the entire country. So we'll see, but it's still really, really high. Medford, Eugene, Albany, Coos Bay, certainly Portland, right? They're all really high. So I think it's a benefit. The good thing here is with remote workers and some of these working from home folks, if you look at what they actually do, the actual jobs that they're doing, and a lot of them are technology, scientists or engineers and the like, they diversify their local economy. Part of the reason why they're working from home or remote workers is they want to live there. They're voting with their feet saying, I want to be a part of our communities, but I can't find the job locally that I want. So I am willing to take this job from wherever it comes from, whether it's Portland and telecommuting to the coast, or from Bay Area telecommuting to Bend, or whatever the case may be. They're saying, I want to live here. I'm going to move here, my family, but I can't find a local job, so I'm going to bring it with me. So it diversifies the local economy and makes it potentially more resilient. The issue here, and the only thing I'd have qualms about, is that what we have seen historically, now the future may be different, but we've seen historically, is when times are tough and you have to start downsizing and cutting things, you consolidate at the hub, at the headquarters, and you kind of cut the satellite offices or the spokes on the wheel. And so if you're a remote worker or a satellite office, and we have a lot of those in Oregon, does that mean in a down cycle, potentially more at risk because you're not going into the headquarters every day? So that is a risk. And so we'll see how that plays out in the future, but it's not, I don't think it's mostly upside risk and good news, but potentially there's that downside to it.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. So you mentioned geographies, Bend being a big work from home area. I would imagine different areas around the state, the coast would be one that's heavily impacted by tourism and things like that. How are some of the different areas of the state impacted or positioned? Kind of maybe what's an area that's most impacted by everything that's going on, and what's an area that's best positioned for everything that's going on right now?
Yeah, so given the nature of the shelter in place policies and social distancing, right, anywhere that has a larger travel and tourism and leisure and hospitality sector has been disproportionately hit hard. That goes for like Nevada and Las Vegas, of course, but here in Oregon, the coast, absolutely, Central Oregon, the Gorge, Hood River, are some of the worst hit spots in the state because they have an overly large tourism sector. Now, long term, that's not expected to be a problem, right? Long term, we think tourism and leisure and hospitality and going out to eat, that's all going to return in the years ahead. And so if you look out 5, let alone 10 years, the North Coast will be fine, Bend will be fine, Hood River will be fine. Just this year and next are going to be pretty bad in that sector. And the key point here being, we have a 50-year, 60-year trend in the United States of spending more and more money going out to eat and less money at the grocery store, at least as a share of our income. And it's to the point where, as Americans, we spend as much money going out to eat as we do at the grocery store. They're at the point where like they're crossing paths, and we're going to spend more at restaurants than at the store. And so I don't think we're going to see a big reversal in that, certainly in the last couple of months and maybe in the year ahead. But long term, that's a long-term structural societal thing that unless there's no vaccine or something down the line, that I don't see that reversing at all. So that's part of the reason we think the tourism stuff will all come back. It'll just take a couple of years. On the other side, the things we're really worried about are what we call goods producing industries. So natural resources, logging, agriculture, manufacturing. They maybe haven't been hit as hard right now because that's not the tip of the spear for the recession. But the problem is once you lose those jobs or those businesses go out, they don't come back, right? You don't get very many startups in the manufacturing realm anymore. It's been decades since we've seen that. And so if we see closures and layoffs in some of those industries, they're going to grow slow or not come all the way back in the future. And so places that have a bigger reliance on that, which most of Oregon does, we have a larger manufacturing sector than most states, that will probably see some permanent losses there, and they won't grow as quickly moving forward. So that's the real concern is permanent layoffs in manufacturing and natural resources more broadly.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, the other thing I was curious about is just the impact on different industries around the state. And you're kind of touching on it already. I mean, tourism impacted today, but down the road, probably not as impacted. Manufacturing, maybe the opposite of that. How are we positioned from an industry perspective in Oregon? How diversified is it? And obviously, in Portland Metro, a bigger presence of tech companies and things like that. What's it looking like from an industry perspective in Oregon?
Yeah, so I think this is something that's been going on for really a couple generations now. But Oregon has never been more diversified than it is today, for good and bad reasons. Good reasons, we're adding a lot of these new jobs that didn't exist before. Portland, one way you could mention it would be that the Portland economy has really added this sort of like white collar professional class, high wage jobs really in the last 10, 15 years. It's really a fairly new thing where the economy has really added those types of jobs where it previously didn't. Maybe some of those legal services or accounting services were outsourced to Seattle or the Bay Area, but Portland has really been developing that level of worker, those wages, those educational attainment type things, and so it's been transformational. Portland, has been some of the fastest growth in the past, this past cycle. Portland really transformed in terms of the nature of the jobs and the wages of the jobs, and that translates into higher rents and stuff like that may be more visible to people than the underlying economic structure. So that's been good, right? That's good news. As long as the people that are left behind or are displaced and the like are accounted for and taken care of. But I think underlying the economics has been good there. The other thing about Oregon would be those historical strengths in terms of wood products and logging, and on the tech side of things, semiconductors and the old guard of tech firms from the 80s and 90s. These aren't exactly growth sectors anymore. Some firms are, but overall the sectors tend to be relatively flat or down, where they're losing more jobs than they're creating. And so growing around that, and there's still huge strengths. They're still really beneficial to have all of these jobs. They're just not growing over the long run that some of the other industries are. And so balancing that, our historical strengths are still good, but they're not growth sectors versus some of these newer industries are really propelling and transforming the regional economies.
Got it. Okay. Now I want to get to housing because I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about housing. Kind of everybody's wondering what's going on there and what the impacts are going to be. But you've mentioned something a couple times about these longer term trends that are in place. Either that's dining in versus grocery consumption, industry shifts in Oregon, things like that. Mike, I guess what I'm wondering is, are there any of these big long-term trends that are maybe been happening over 50 years or more that you see, reversing or stalling out because of what's going on? And you just see anything that would fit that category?
Probably not permanently, or at least not big enough to really move some of the macroeconomic needles. I think certainly short term, business travel and whatnot, let alone leisure travel, right? I think, yeah, if you're looking to, if you run an airline business, really, really tough go of it this year and next, but do I think we're going to see permanent reductions in travel 5 years down the road? Probably not, as long as the health side of things is cleared up and we get some sort of treatment. So I struggle to see a lot of permanent changes. I think the real risk lie in is what types of companies go out of business during the recession, right? It's not necessarily that the consumer demand is going to destroy the industry. It's that the short-term shutdown and nature of this really just causes businesses to go, to become insolvent, right? Right now, they really just have financial cash flow problems, but they still have a structurally sound business. But the longer it goes, the more firm closures we'll see, just because nobody has enough reserves to go 6-9 months or whatever you need. So I think that's where we'll see some of the permanent changes will be kind of on that business by business level type stuff.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So let's get to housing. So sort of the long-term trends there are undersupply. We haven't built a lot new, especially on the residential side, since the last recession. Prices really escalating, but affordability getting a little bit better, at least of late. What's your outlook for housing? trends continue. It seems like it's maybe been impacted less. I know personally, we're in the midst of moving, and we've put our house in the market and it sold the first weekend. So, it seems like there's still demand out there for residential real estate. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think we have to balance these facts that I'll talk first about our forecast. Our forecast has normal recessionary dynamics built into it for housing. So that means we have lower rates of household formation as people they stay at home, they live at home, or they have more roommates because of the finances. They can't afford to live on their own, or they're uncertain. Or they're like, maybe I'll lose my job, so I don't want to sign a new lease or whatever. So the household formation rates are lower, migration rates are lower, so there's few. So overall, the demand is down for financial reasons and migration reasons. And that translates into less housing starts, less new residential construction activity, and the like, and slower home price appreciation. So that's a normal recessionary dynamic, and that's the nature of our forecast. But as you're saying, we haven't really seen that. Yeah, some of the sales numbers are down, the permits and the start date is down in March and April or whatnot, but it's coming back into May, and we'll get June data here in a couple of weeks. And so there's no question that housing on the residential side is doing better than expected. Now, I think there's some reasons for that, some clear short-term reasons, and one big long-term reason. And so the long-term reason is the aging of the millennials, right? The aging, if you fast forward between now and the end of the decade, the millennials will be entirely in their 30s and their 40s, right? And so, early 30s is first-time home buyers predominantly. In Oregon, even today with student loan debt and all that sort of stuff going on in unaffordable housing, even today across Oregon, mid-30s is where people are 50-50 owner-renter. So as those millennials age into their 30s and their 40s, we're going to see a big demand for ownership, in particular, residential ownership. And so there's a big structural tailwind to housing. And then in the short term, very low interest rates. We have, not recovery rebates, not stimulus payments, recovery rebates. So people got a couple $1,000 directed, deposited into their bank accounts. And you have the unemployment insurance benefit expansion. So we have income support in the last couple of months. We have low interest rates. We have the long-term demographics. Plus, if we're going to be honest about it, the people most impacted by the shutdown and the recession have been low-wage service workers at bars and restaurants and stuff. And they tend to be more renters due to the finances. And the higher wage households have been less impacted, and they tend to be more owners because of the financial situation too. So I think there's a reason why housing has held up stronger than maybe those normal recessionary dynamics. The question is, over the next 12 months, how do those balance out? And so I think the jury's still out. I still think we'll see some recessionary dynamics in housing still to come, but we also have to admit that we haven't seen it. And so that's good news for you on selling it. I don't know if that means that's good news on you trying to buy somewhere else, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. So just one more question, and I want to get to my closing question here. But I guess based on all this ground that we've covered, what advice would you have for somebody maybe that's running a business or owns a business here in the state of Oregon? I mean, what I'm hearing is long term, there's nothing structurally broken about our economy, but there is going to be a period where it's more volatile, more painful, more challenging. So based on that, kind of what advice would you have for somebody running a business, owning a business here in the state?
Yeah, I think you got to be prudent, right? In the near term, make sure you're holding on to some reserves, or not maybe scaling up all the way back overnight, making sure you're phasing that. But make sure that's not good for economic growth. Economic growth, we all want to go back and do our normal stuff immediately. But if you're on the individual business owner perspective, I think that would definitely be good. And the advice, we always give, or our advisors always give, is talk to your lenders. Always talk to your lenders in good times. Don't just wait for the crisis to talk to your lenders. So that advice is 4 months too late, but everyone knows that, right? That don't just talk to them when you desperately need assistance, but maintain that relationship. And really throughout your supply chain, right? And be cognizant of the fact that we've had a lot of shutdowns, and supply chains are increasingly global in nature. So if you're worried about that Taiwan, input, that valve you're getting from a manufacturer in Taiwan, always have a sort of backup plan. Maybe you got to get another one from Guatemala or Mexico or wherever that other supply chain link would come in. Trying to just maintain some of those relationships is always helpful. And that relationship's even more critical during a bad economy than a good one. So that'd be some of the first things I would say.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, thank you. So all this has been very valuable, very helpful. Thanks for sharing with us. I got one final question, and it's more on the personal side. So after we get back to normal, kind of when things, whatever that ends up looking like, what are you most excited to get back to kind of personally, or what have you learned through all this? You've been convinced that you can kind of cut out of your life and that you don't need to get back to a normal routine.
I think it's for me, it's sports, right? Getting to sporting events, whether it's the Timbers or Summer League baseball or something. Don't go to a ton, right? Don't go to a ton, particularly with the kids and all that. But just having that ability and certainly watching it, the biggest thing for me will be watching football in the fall. So I would love for us to get to a point where we're comfortable and healthy. It's healthy, we can actually do that sort of thing. And go out and have a couple beverages while we're watching the game or something like that. That'd be my hope for this fall. I don't know if we're going to get there, but that fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're alone in that. So we'll see and hope for the best. So, all right. Well, I appreciate it. Appreciate you being here with us, Josh, and sharing everything you have. So really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.